There comes a moment in every woman's life when the silence around her becomes heavier than the words she once longed to hear, when she begins to sense that love has turned into habit and presence into invisibility. That morning was quiet, like any other, the air still, the house asleep. But somewhere between the clinking of dishes and the hum of the coffee pot, she felt it. A hollowness that stretched across the walls she had painted with her own hands. She stood still, listening to the faint sounds of her family moving about, but no one spoke her name. No one asked if she had slept well. No one noticed the tired look behind her eyes, the kind of tiredness that comes not from work, but from being unseen. She realized in that moment that silence has a way of revealing truths that words often hide. She remembered how mornings once felt full of laughter and sunlight, the kids running to her with messy hair and sleepy eyes, her husband wrapping his arms around her, whispering small pieces of gratitude. Now all that warmth had been replaced by routine. They walked past her like she was part of the furniture, a shadow moving in the background. And she smiled, even though her heart trembled, because women are taught to smile through pain, to pretend that love is still there even when it has forgotten to speak back. She watched her reflection in the coffee cup, a small, distorted version of herself fading in the ripples, and thought how strange it is to live in a house filled with people, yet feel utterly alone. There is a kind of quiet that breaks you slowly, not with cruelty, but with indifference. And that was the quiet that wrapped itself around her that day. She tried to breathe through it, tried to tell herself it was just a busy morning, that they loved her, even if they forgot to show it. But deep down, she knew something had changed, something invisible yet undeniable. The center of her world had shifted, and she was no longer standing where love used to hold her. She looked at the table set for everyone but herself, at the way her husband's eyes were fixed on his phone, the children laughing at something they never shared with her, and she felt her existence slipping between the cracks of their conversations. In that silence, she heard everything: the exhaustion, the neglect, the fading affection, the loss of connection. It was all there, echoing in the absence of her name. She thought about all the years she had given, all the mornings she had risen first and slept last, all the birthdays she planned, the tears she wiped, the dreams she had buried under laundry and bills and obligations. And yet, in return, all she received was this quiet, this empty kind of forgetting. It was a realization not born of anger, but of sorrow, a surrender to the truth that love, if left unwatered, eventually wilts in the most beautiful hearts. But within that silent pain, something gentle stirred, a small flicker of self-awareness, a whisper that said, "You are still here, you still matter." She held on to that whisper because it was all she had left, and as she stood there in the soft light of dawn, she let herself feel it fully, the ache, the longing, the emptiness. She didn't push it away, because maybe feeling unseen is the first step to seeing yourself again. Maybe being forgotten is the beginning of remembering who you were before you gave everything away. That morning, she didn't cry, she didn't shout. She just breathed and let the silence tell its story. A story of love that faded slowly, of a woman who gave too much and asked for nothing, and of a heart that learned that sometimes silence is not the absence of love, but the echo of what once was. There was a time when the house felt alive, when every wall carried the rhythm of laughter, when footsteps meant stories, and dinner time meant love gathered around a single table. But somewhere along the way, that warmth slipped away, unnoticed. It didn't happen in a single night. It faded slowly, like light at the end of the day, until one morning she woke up and realized she was living among strangers.
The people she once called her world now moved through her life like ghosts, passing through air. They spoke to her only when needed. They smiled out of habit, not affection. And the air that once danced with joy now felt heavy with distance. She walked through the rooms she had once filled with color. Each picture on the wall told a story of love that once was strong. But even the colors seemed to fade, as if memory itself was tired. She could still see her children's laughter in old photographs, the sparkle in their eyes when they used to run into her arms. Now they barely looked up from their screens, their voices short, their hearts elsewhere. Her husband's eyes that once found hers across crowded rooms now looked right through her, as if she was made of glass. She had become invisible, not because she changed, but because they stopped looking. Connection is a fragile thing. It does not break with a single argument. It withers through neglect, through the thousand small moments when someone forgets to listen, to ask, to care. She remembered the night she stayed awake waiting for him to come home, the mornings she packed lunches and whispered prayers, the evenings she smiled through exhaustion, telling herself that love means holding on even when the other hand lets go. But the truth is, love cannot survive in silence. It needs attention. It needs presence. It needs two hearts breathing in the same rhythm. And somewhere along the years, their hearts had forgotten how to beat together. She tried to bring it back. She tried through dinners, through laughter, through memories, through hope. But hope can only carry one heart for so long. She watched as they drifted further away, each lost in their own world. And she stood in the center of that house, surrounded by people, yet entirely alone. She wondered, when did her laughter stop echoing in their hearts? When did her care become invisible? When did she stop being someone they've reached for? She walked outside for a moment, breathing in the cold air. The world still moved around her. Cars passing, birds singing, children playing. Yet inside her, everything stood still. She realized the connection she missed was not just with her family, it was with herself. She had poured every part of her being into keeping everyone close that she forgot to hold on to her own soul. And now that they were distant, she felt the hollow emptiness of all that she had given away. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She wanted to cry, but tears no longer fell. She had grown so used to hiding her pain that even sadness felt like a stranger. She sat on the porch, staring at the horizon where the sky turned gold, and whispered a truth she had long avoided. Maybe this disconnection was not punishment. Maybe it was awakening. Maybe it was life telling her it is time to return to herself. The world had changed, her family had changed, love had changed. But somewhere deep inside her, the woman who once believed in laughter still waited to be found. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't imagine fixing anyone or saving anything. She simply imagined holding herself close, promising never to let go again. Because connection begins within. And perhaps in finding herself, she would one day find her way back to love.
There is a pain that does not scream, a pain that does not break or bleed, but quietly erases you from the spaces you once filled. She felt it every morning when she moved through her own home, unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. She had become a shadow that cleaned, cooked, cared, and smiled, yet no one really looked at her. Not the way they once did, not the way that made her feel alive. She was there in every moment, yet missing from every memory. She had turned into a presence so familiar that it became invisible, the heartbeat of a house that no one stopped to listen to. She could remember how it once felt to be seen, the way her husband's eyes would light up when she entered the room, the way her children's laughter carried her name. Now she stood among them like air, necessary but unnoticed. She would set the table carefully, each plate aligned, each cup placed with quiet love, and they would sit and eat and talk without ever looking at her. She moved like a ghost through the motions of her own life, doing everything right, yet feeling like nothing at all. Invisible presence is not born in a single day. It grows with time,
with small forgotten thank yous, with the slow fading of appreciation. It is when your voice becomes background noise, when your face becomes part of the scenery, when love stops being spoken and starts being assumed. She had given so much of herself that there was nothing left to demand attention with. She had taught them that she would always be there, no matter what, so they stopped noticing her being there. She began to wonder if this was what love was supposed to become, a quiet endurance, a fading existence. She walked past the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The eyes once filled with wonder, now tired. The smile once bright, now soft and hollow. She thought of how easily she had become transparent, not because she stopped loving, but because she loved too deeply. She had become the walls that held everyone together, the light that guided them, the calm that studied storms. Yet no one ever saw the strength behind her silence. One evening she stood by the window, watching the sunset bleed into the sky, the colors mixing into something beautiful yet fleeting. And she thought, maybe this is what I am. Beautiful but fleeting, present but unseen, giving but fading. She wanted someone to notice, to really notice. Not the way you notice an object out of place, but the way you notice something that matters. She wanted to be seen, not for what she did, but for who she was. As the night settled, she sat alone at the edge of her bed, the laughter of her family echoing faintly from the other room, and she felt the ache of being surrounded by love that no longer reached her heart. She whispered to herself that maybe invisibility is not the end. Maybe it is the beginning of rediscovery. Maybe being unseen by others will teach her to finally see herself. She closed her eyes and let the silence wrap around her, not as punishment, but as space, as stillness, as the place where she could finally hear her own voice again. In that quiet, she found something gentle, a realization that she had power, even in invisibility, that her worth did not disappear because others failed to see it, that her existence was not defined by their attention, but by her own awareness. She decided that the next morning she would look at herself differently, not as a shadow, but as light, the kind of light that shines even when no one is watching. And though no one noticed her that night, she noticed herself. And that was the beginning of becoming visible again. It was never the big things that broke her. It was the small ones, the tiny moments that passed quietly, the ones no one ever noticed, the mornings when no one said good morning, the dinners where her voice was lost between laughter that did not include her, the birthdays that came and went without warmth, the days when her care was expected but never returned. Neglect does not arrive like a storm. It creeps in softly, hidden behind busy schedules and tired excuses. It begins when love becomes routine, when gratitude turns into silence, when presence turns into absence. She had once believed that families drift only when anger or betrayal enters, but now she knew that sometimes they drift because people stop trying. She would cook their favorite meals, arrange the table with quiet detail, and no one would look up from their screens. She would ask about their day and receive half answers without eye contact, and she would smile, pretending it didn't hurt because mothers are supposed to be strong, wives are supposed to understand, women are supposed to endure. She carried every unnoticed effort like invisible weight across her heart. Each forgotten thank you, each overlooked gesture became a small wound, and with time, those wounds grew into something deeper, something heavy. She started to doubt herself, wondering if she was expecting too much, if maybe love is meant to fade, if maybe it was her fault for needing to be seen. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't about needing attention, it was about needing acknowledgement. She wanted someone to remember that behind every clean shirt and warm meal was a person who stayed up late making it happen. She wanted them to see her humanity, not just her responsibility. Everyday neglect is the slowest kind of heartbreak. It takes away pieces of you so gently that you do not even realize what is missing until one day you wake up and feel empty. She had reached that point, the emptiness, where nothing was wrong, yet everything was missing. She looked around her home, the photos on the walls, the gifts she once cherished, the laughter echoing faintly from the other room, and all of it felt distant, like a movie she used to be part of but no longer belonged to. She longed for someone to notice, not because she needed praise, but because she needed connection. She wanted to feel that what she gave mattered, that her sacrifices meant something. She remembered the days when her children used to hug her for no reason, the nights her husband used to thank her for dinner, small things that once filled her soul, now gone, replaced by silence and routine. She had become part of the background, like furniture, reliable and unseen. One evening, as she folded laundry, she paused holding a shirt that smelled faintly of her son's cologne, and she smiled, a fragile smile, realizing how much love she had poured into every thread, every meal, every touch, and how little of it was ever seen. Yet she kept giving because that is what love does. It gives even when forgotten. It endures even when unseen. But something within her began to shift that night. A quiet voice whispered, "Maybe it is time to stop surviving neglect and start nurturing yourself." She walked to the mirror, the soft yellow light reflecting the lines of years spent caring for everyone but herself. She looked into her own eyes and said softly, "I see you. I know you are tired. I know you are unseen, but you are still here. You are still worthy." She let the truth settle deep in her heart, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something new. Not pain, not anger, but resolve. The quiet decision to no longer live unseen. Neglect may have dimmed her light, but it could not extinguish it, because light does not disappear. It waits. It waits for the day when someone finally chooses to turn toward it. And she decided that day she would be that someone. She would choose herself. She would see herself. She would love herself. There is a kind of loss that does not announce itself. It does not come with tears or shouting. It arrives quietly, like dust settling over everything you once loved. It hides in the moments when you begin to fade from the hearts of those you built your world around. She felt that slow vanishing inside her, every day a piece of her disappearing, not because she stopped giving, but because they stopped seeing. It was not rejection, it was replacement. Her love, once bright and full, had become background, something assumed, something constant, something that no one thought could disappear. She used to be the center of their stories. Every memory, every joy, every victory, somehow traced back to her care, her sacrifice, her devotion. But now she watched as new stories were written without her name. She was there in the photos, yet missing from the moments. There in the home, yet absent from their gratitude. Her love had become so ordinary to them that it was invisible, and she began to wonder if she still existed in their hearts or only in their routines. Emotional erasure is not about forgetting birthdays or skipping thank yous. It is about the slow rewriting of a woman's presence until she becomes invisible in her own life. She realized this the day her daughter spoke about her inspirations, naming everyone but her. She realized it when her husband spoke of support and strength, but never looked in her direction. She realized it when her son spoke of love, yet never mentioned the one who had given him all of it. It was not anger she felt. It was the quiet grief of being erased from the very love she had created. She tried to remind herself that they still cared, that deep down they loved her, but love without recognition becomes hollow. It loses color. It becomes a habit, and habits do not hold the same warmth as love. She could feel her spirit fading under the weight of their forgetfulness, and yet she kept smiling. She kept showing up, because that is what women do. They keep loving even when their hearts begin to disappear. One evening, she sat alone by the window, the light from the street lamp falling softly on her face.
She thought about all the versions of herself she had left behind: the dreamer, the artist, the woman who once laughed so freely. She had given those parts away in pieces, until nothing was left but this quiet ghost of a woman who served everyone but herself. She closed her eyes and, for a moment, tried to remember how it felt to be known, truly known, not as mother, not as wife, but as herself. And she realized she couldn't. She had been erased, even from her own memory. But in that stillness, something stirred deep within her, a faint whisper of rebellion, a spark of the woman she once was, saying, "I am still here. I have not vanished. I have not gone." She took a deep breath and felt her heart pulse again, weak but real. She looked out at the night and realized that though they had forgotten her, she did not have to forget herself. She could choose to rewrite the story. She could choose to bring herself back into the picture. So she did. She began with small things. She played her favorite song. She wore the colors she used to love. She wrote her name on a page, not as mother or wife, but as her own. And in those moments, she felt herself returning. Not fully, not yet, but enough to know that she still existed. Because erasure only wins when you stop remembering yourself. The world outside kept moving, her family kept laughing. Their lives continued as if nothing had changed. But inside her, something had shifted. She no longer waited to be seen, she no longer begged to be remembered. She became her own witness, her own proof of life. And though she had been erased from their stories, she began writing her own again. There are sacrifices that leave marks, and there are those that leave nothing at all. She lived a life full of the second kind, the unseen kind, the quiet kind, the kind that hides behind smiles and warm dinners and gentle words. She had built her family out of her own bones, piece by piece, giving until she forgot what it meant to take. She had once dreamed of a life filled with art and travel and endless skies. But she traded those dreams for love. She believed love was the higher purpose, and so she gave without hesitation. She gave her time, her energy, her sleep, her laughter, until her reflection no longer looked like her. She became the foundation of everyone's world, but no one noticed the cracks forming beneath her feet. She remembered the nights she stayed awake rocking her babies while the world slept, the days she stood in the kitchen with tears that no one saw because she refused to let them fall. She remembered how she learned to swallow her pain so it would not disturb the peace, how she learned to smile through disappointment because that is what good women do. They hold everyone else together, even when they are falling apart. She had given everything she had to make sure they never felt what she felt. But the cruel truth was that the more she gave, the more invisible she became. Unseen sacrifices are the quietest heartbreaks. They are made in the background of other people's joy. They are the hours spent waiting, the moments spent understanding, the dreams set aside for the sake of someone else's comfort. She could see it all around her, the evidence of her love in every detail of their lives. Her husband's success built on her steady support, her children's happiness carved from her sleepless nights, her home glowing from her endless care. Yet none of it carried her name. It was all invisible love hidden behind the illusion that things just happened naturally. She often wondered what it would feel like if someone saw it. If someone stopped one day and said, "I know what you've given. I see what you've done." She wondered how it would feel to be thanked, not with words, but with understanding,
To be loved not for what she provided, but for who she was beneath the giving. She longed for that simple recognition, but it never came. And so she learned to carry her sacrifices quietly, like medals that no one pinned to her chest. There were moments when exhaustion felt like a shadow following her, but she kept walking. She kept cooking, cleaning, listening, comforting. She kept believing that love was worth the price, even when she was the only one paying it. She looked at her hands one evening, rough from years of work, and thought of how many lives they had held, how many tears they had wiped, how many dreams they had let go of. She realized those hands had built a world, and yet they had never been held the way they deserved to be held. But something inside her began to stir, a new thought, a dangerous one. What if she did not have to disappear for love to exist? What if she could be whole and still give? What if sacrifice without recognition was not noble, but tragic? That thought scared her and freed her at the same time. She stood in front of the mirror and saw not weakness, but strength, not loss, but legacy. She realized her sacrifices, though unseen, were not wasted. They had shaped her into something unbreakable. The world may never notice the quiet wars she fought, but she knew now that she did not need their acknowledgement to validate her love. Her worth did not come from being seen. It came from surviving unseen, from giving without losing her soul completely. And as she stood there with tears that did not fall, she whispered to herself that maybe it was time to stop sacrificing who she was for the sake of being loved. Maybe it was time to love herself with the same devotion she had given to everyone else. And in that moment, the unseen became visible to her heart.
There comes a point in every woman's life when she looks in the mirror and does not recognize the face staring back, when the name she once answered to feels distant, like a word from another lifetime. She stood there one morning, the early light brushing across her skin, and she saw not the woman she once dreamed of becoming, but the one life had shaped through duty and repetition. Somewhere between being a wife, a mother, a caretaker, she had misplaced herself. She had been so busy holding others that she forgot how to hold herself. Her reflection felt like a stranger, polite, silent, waiting to be remembered. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one who painted sunsets with wild colors, the one who danced barefoot in the rain, the one who had plans that reached beyond the walls of her home.
There comes a point in every woman's life when she looks in the mirror and does not recognize the face staring back, when the name she once answered to feels distant, like a word from another lifetime. She stood there one morning, the early light brushing across her skin, and she saw not the woman she once dreamed of becoming, but the one life had shaped through duty and repetition. Somewhere between being a wife, a mother, a caretaker, she had misplaced herself. She had been so busy holding others that she forgot how to hold herself. Her reflection felt like a stranger, polite, silent, waiting to be remembered. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one who painted sunsets with wild colors, the one who danced barefoot in the rain, the one who had plans that reached beyond the walls of her home. But life has a way of rewriting dreams, slowly, gently, until you no longer notice what it has taken. She married young, believing love would make her whole. She built a home, believing stability would bring joy. She raised her children, believing sacrifice was purpose. But in all of it, she forgot the simplest truth, that she too was a person, not just a role, not just a name called when something was needed. Each day, her identity faded a little more, replaced by tasks, lists, routines, responsibilities. She became a title: mother, wife, helper, listener, provider, everything except herself.
When people asked how she was, she answered with the state of her family, not the state of her soul. She measured her worth by their smiles, by their needs, by their comfort. She no longer had hobbies, no longer had dreams, no longer had a language that belonged only to her. Her laughter was quieter now, her gaze softer, her edges smoothed by years of giving too much. Forgotten identity is not an accident. It is the cost of constant care. It is what happens when love is taught to mean self-erasure. She didn't notice it at first. She thought it was normal to fade. She thought that's what good women do. They disappear behind the people they love. But one day, standing alone in the quiet, she realized she could not answer the simplest question: who am I? Not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a role, but as a woman. She felt the emptiness of that silence. It was heavy like grief. She began to search for traces of herself in small things: the old sketchbook hidden in a drawer, the music she used to love, the perfume she stopped wearing. She found pieces of her past self scattered like forgotten stars, and as she touched them, she felt something awaken inside her, something soft but fierce. She began to remember what it felt like to dream for herself, to want for herself, to exist beyond her usefulness. She started to walk differently, slower, steadier, as if reclaiming her own name with every step. Her family did not notice the change, not at first. They still called her the same, they still saw her through the same lens. But she noticed, and that was enough. She no longer apologized for taking a moment alone, no longer dismissed her own needs, no longer felt guilty for wanting more. She realized she had the right to belong to herself. She did not need permission to exist. She had been her own stranger for too long, and now she was ready to return home to her own soul. She stood by the window one evening, watching the sunset melt across the sky, and whispered her own name just to hear how it sounded again. It felt sacred. It felt alive. It felt like truth. And in that whisper, she understood that identity is not something others give you. It is something you must protect fiercely, because once lost, it takes everything else with it. That night, she slept peacefully for the first time in years, not because the world had changed, but because she had remembered who she was. And that simple remembrance was enough to begin again.
There are moments in life that do not shatter you all at once. They break you quietly, piece by piece, until one day you realize the person you used to be has dissolved into something unrecognizable. She had lived through many such moments, the ones that seemed ordinary to everyone else, but tore through her heart like invisible storms. She remembered the first time her daughter forgot to say thank you after dinner, the first time her son walked past her without meeting her eyes, the first time her husband spoke of gratitude and never mentioned her name. They were small things, yet they echoed in the deepest corners of her being, because love, when forgotten, does not just fade, it wounds. She would sit through family dinners, surrounded by voices and laughter, and still feel utterly alone. They would talk about their days, their plans, their dreams, and she would listen, smiling softly, never interrupting, never reminding them that she too had stories to tell. She wanted to speak, but no one ever asked. She wanted to be seen, but no one ever looked, and so she sat there, quiet and invisible, holding back words that might have reminded them she still existed. She realized how easy it was for people to overlook what has always been there, how simple it is to forget the hands that made every comfort possible. Her heartbreaks were not the kind that drew sympathy. They were silent, private, the kind that settled in her bones. She would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, replaying moments when they chose others over her, the birthdays they celebrated without her presence, the milestones they shared without acknowledgement, the days they spoke of love and never thought of her. She wondered how something so full could feel so empty, how a home built from love could make her feel so forgotten. She did not want gifts or praise. She only wanted to be remembered. She only wanted them to say her name with warmth again. One afternoon, she watched her daughter post a photo with the caption, "My heroes," and her heart paused, waiting to see her name. But it wasn't there.
She smiled for a moment because mothers learn to smile through pain, but inside she felt something crumble. She realized that perhaps she had done her job too well. She had made their lives so safe, so seamless, that they forgot she was the one holding it all together. She had given them everything, and in return they forgot she was ever there. Heartbreaking moments are often quiet. They do not come with thunder. They arrive softly, like shadows at dusk. They linger. They stay. They shape who you become. She carried those moments not as memories, but as weights, each one pressing deeper into her chest. Yet through that pain, she discovered a truth she had never known before. Sometimes being forgotten teaches you the importance of remembering yourself. She began to understand that love cannot only flow outward, it must also return inward. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, she sat by the window alone, the moonlight falling across her tired hands. She let herself feel it all: the sorrow, the longing, the ache of being unappreciated and unseen. And instead of pushing it away, she whispered to it softly, "You are allowed to hurt. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to wish someone saw you." She closed her eyes and felt tears she hadn't shed in years, not tears of weakness, but of release. She was mourning herself, the parts of her that had been lost to neglect, and she decided she would no longer hide that pain, because it was proof she had loved deeply. Those heartbreaking moments still came, but she began to meet them differently. Instead of letting them silence her, she let them awaken her. She began writing small notes to herself, small promises that she would not fade again, that she would fill her own cup, that she would speak her truth even if no one listened. And with each promise, she felt lighter, stronger, more alive. She learned that heartbreak can destroy you, or it can return you to yourself. And she chose the latter. She chose to live. She stood before the mirror one morning as the light of dawn brushed gently across her face. And for the first time in years, she truly looked. She did not glance the way she usually did, rushing through her reflection like an afterthought. She stood still, letting her own image stare back at her. And in that quiet moment, something inside her shifted. She saw not a mother, not a wife, not a caretaker, but a woman who had been missing from her own life for far too long. The mirror did not lie. It showed the exhaustion etched beneath her eyes, the lines carved from years of silent endurance, the weariness that had settled deep within her spirit. It showed her truth. For years, she had avoided that gaze, afraid of what she might find, afraid of the sadness she had hidden behind smiles. But the mirror has a way of stripping away illusions. It reflects not only the face, but the soul. And when she looked that morning, she saw the story her heart had been whispering all along. She saw the sacrifices that no one thanked her for, the strength that no one acknowledged, the love that was taken for granted. She realized she had been disappearing slowly, and now all that was left was a woman who had forgotten her own name. The mirror did not show beauty in the way the world defines it, but it showed resilience. It showed survival. It showed the quiet grace of someone who has carried too much for too long. She reached out, touching her reflection gently, as if comforting another person, and whispered, "I remember you." Her voice trembled because it was both a promise and an apology, a promise to not lose herself again, and an apology for having done so. She saw the girl she used to be behind her tired eyes, the one who loved deeply, who dreamed wildly, who believed in magic and hope. And she realized that girl was still there, waiting patiently beneath the weight of years. Looking at herself, she remembered all the moments she had dismissed her own feelings for the sake of others, all the times she stayed quiet when she should have spoken, all the times she put herself last because she believed love meant sacrifice. The mirror showed her the cost of that belief. It showed her that in trying to be everything for everyone, she had stopped being anything for herself. She stood there, breathing softly, letting the truth settle. Not as a wound, but as a revelation. She could no longer deny who she had become, but she could choose who she would be next. She thought about how easy it is to look without seeing, to exist without living, to give without receiving. And she promised herself that those days were over. She would no longer walk past her reflection pretending not to notice. She would meet her own eyes every morning and honor the woman staring back, because she deserved to be seen. She deserved to be heard. She deserved to be loved not for what she did, but for who she was. She smiled then, a fragile smile that carried both sorrow and strength, the kind that comes when truth and healing finally meet. The mirror had once been her enemy, showing her only the parts she wished to hide. But now it had become her witness. It reflected not her flaws, but her courage, not her exhaustion, but her endurance. It became a sacred place where she could remind herself that she was still here, still breathing, still capable of love. She leaned closer, whispering softly, "You are enough. You have always been enough." The words felt strange at first, foreign on her tongue, but with each breath they grew stronger until they filled the room with quiet conviction. She turned away from the mirror not with sadness, but with peace. She walked out of the room a little taller, a little freer, carrying with her the truth she had found that morning, that the woman in the mirror was not lost. She was waiting, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be seen, waiting to be loved by the one person who mattered most, herself. It began quietly, like the first breath after a long sleep, a whisper rising from somewhere deep within her, a pulse she had not felt in years, the feeling of being alive again. She did not plan for it. It came uninvited on an ordinary morning when the sun spilled through her window, touching her face with warmth she hadn't noticed before. She sat on the edge of her bed and felt something shift, a gentle but undeniable stirring, as if her soul was stretching after years of being still. It was her inner awakening. She walked to the kitchen, the same steps, the same routine, but everything looked different. She saw sunlight dancing on the floor. She heard the wind outside humming softly. She noticed the sound of her own breathing, steady, calm, alive. It was strange and beautiful how the world had not changed, yet it felt completely new because she was seeing it through eyes that were finally open. For years, she had moved through life like a ghost, always giving, always running, always quiet. But that morning she realized she was still here, and that meant she could still begin again. She brewed coffee slowly, taking in its warmth, feeling the mug between her hands. She closed her eyes and smiled, not because something extraordinary had happened, but because for the first time she felt gratitude for herself. She thought about how long it had been since she thanked her own heart for surviving the storms, since she appreciated her own strength for staying steady when everything else fell apart. She had been so busy loving others that she forgot to love the person who made it all possible. She whispered softly, "Thank you," to herself, and the sound of those words filled the room with peace. Her awakening was not loud. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic moments. It was quiet, like rain returning to the earth after a drought. It was gentle, like forgiveness finding its way back to a tired soul. She began to notice small things, the softness of her bed sheets, the laughter of children outside, the way her favorite song made her chest ache with joy. She realized life was not asking her to be perfect. It was asking her to be present, to feel, to breathe, to exist as herself again. She had spent so long trying to be what others needed that she had forgotten the beauty of simply being who she was meant to be. In the days that followed, she started writing again, words flowing like water from a place she thought had dried up. She cooked meals just for herself, setting the table with care. She took walks without purpose, breathing in the world as if for the first time. Each act, no matter how small, became a quiet rebellion against the years she had spent invisible. She no longer waited for others to see her. She saw herself, and that was enough. She found that self-love was not vanity. It was survival. It was remembering your own worth even when the world forgets it. There were moments when old doubts crept in, when the echo of neglect tried to pull her back into the shadows. But this time she did not surrender. She whispered to her reflection the same words she once wished to hear. You are not forgotten. You are not broken. You are becoming. She learned that awakening is not a single moment. It is a lifelong unfolding, a slow return to yourself, piece by piece, breath by breath. She let go of guilt. She let go of the need for approval. She let go of the old version of herself that only knew how to endure, and in its place, she began to bloom. Her laughter returned, soft but real. Her eyes shone again, not with pain, but with possibility. She realized joy does not come from being remembered by others, but from remembering yourself. She began to move through the world differently, not with fear, but with faith. Faith that she was enough, faith that her story still mattered, faith that even after being forgotten, she could rise again. She had finally found the courage to meet life on her own terms, to live not in the shadow of others, but in the light of her own awakening. And in that quiet rebirth, she discovered the most powerful truth of all, that the world does not decide when your story begins again. You do.
There was a time when silence felt like punishment, when empty rooms echoed with the sound of her own loneliness, and she would do anything to fill that space with noise, with people, with distractions. She feared solitude because it reminded her of everything she had lost. But one day, the quiet no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like peace. She began to understand that being alone was not the same as being abandoned. It was a chance to return to herself, to breathe without pretending, to listen without performing, to simply exist in her own company. And that discovery became her quiet revolution. She started spending mornings with herself, sitting by the window as sunlight poured over her shoulders, watching dust float gently through the air. And for the first time, she noticed how stillness could feel alive. She sipped her tea slowly, her thoughts untangling like threads in the warmth of the morning. She did not rush to check her phone or fill the silence with sound. She just listened to the rhythm of her heartbeat. And it felt like meeting an old friend, one she had ignored for far too long. She realized that solitude was not her enemy, it was her sanctuary. In those hours of stillness, she began to rebuild. She found herself remembering the things she once loved: painting, reading, walking barefoot on grass. She no longer needed validation from anyone to feel complete. She learned to celebrate her own presence, to find joy in her own laughter, to take herself on quiet adventures through streets she had never noticed before. Each step whispering that she was enough. She found strength in the gentle act of choosing herself again. The world had taught her that being alone meant being unloved, but solitude taught her something deeper. It taught her that love begins within, that when you find peace in your own presence, you stop begging for it from others. She began to see how much power she had given away in her search for belonging, and how freeing it felt to finally hold that power in her own hands. She learned to enjoy her meals alone, not as an act of sadness, but of celebration. She lit candles, she played soft music, she spoke kindly to herself, and every little moment became a ceremony of self-respect. Some nights the loneliness still tried to creep back, whispering old lies, telling her she was forgotten. But she no longer feared those whispers. She would sit with them and say softly, I am here, I am whole, I am not waiting for anyone to complete me. She discovered that strength was not about being unbreakable. It was about standing tall even after being broken. It was about finding calm in the storm and choosing peace over chaos.
She began to understand that solitude was not a void. It was a mirror reflecting her growth, her healing, her rebirth. Through solitude, she began to dream again. Not the fragile dreams of survival, but the brave ones of creation. She wrote letters she would never send, painted sunsets that reminded her of her resilience, and danced barefoot in her living room under the glow of the moon. She laughed at how strange and beautiful life could be, how pain could turn into art, how silence could sound like music. She realized that solitude was not empty. It was full of herself, and that was enough. Over time, she stopped seeking constant connection. She no longer measured her worth by who stayed or who left. She knew that anyone who could not meet her peace did not deserve her energy. She had become her own home, her own safe place, her own strength. And in that stillness, she discovered the most tender kind of love, the kind that does not demand or beg, the kind that holds you steady when the world forgets you. She learned that solitude was not loneliness, it was freedom. And it was in that freedom that she found herself again. When she looked out at the world now, she did not feel small or invisible. She felt grounded. She felt whole. She understood that sometimes you have to lose everything, even yourself, to realize that the one person you truly needed was within you all along. And in that realization, she smiled softly, her heart steady, her spirit unshaken, because she had finally learned that being alone is not the end. It is the beginning of becoming.
It began as a whisper inside her, a small voice that had been waiting patiently beneath the noise of years spent giving too much and receiving too little. It told her to look inward, to love herself the way she had always loved others. She had spent so long believing that self-love was selfish, that caring for herself meant neglecting the people she cherished. But as she stood at the edge of her own exhaustion, she realized the truth. Self-love was not a luxury, it was a lifeline. It was the light she had been searching for in everyone else. And when she turned it toward herself, everything began to change. She started small. She began by speaking gently to her reflection, no longer judging the lines on her face or the tiredness in her eyes. She saw them not as flaws, but as proof of her survival. She ran her fingers over the softness of her skin and whispered, "Thank you for carrying me through it all." Every scar, every wrinkle, every mark told a story of endurance, and she honored them as symbols of her strength. She learned that love was not always grand. It could be as quiet as choosing rest, as tender as saying no, as powerful as forgiving herself for all the times she stayed silent. There were moments when the old guilt tried to return, when she felt the weight of all the years she had forgotten herself. But this time she did not hide from it. She met it with compassion. She told herself, it is never too late to begin again. She stopped chasing perfection and started embracing truth. She learned that love was not something she had to earn. It was something she could give herself freely without conditions. She began to treat her own heart the way she once treated everyone else, with patience, with kindness, with devotion. Each day became a new chapter in her healing. She started walking with her head higher, her shoulders softer, her steps slower. She no longer rushed through life trying to please everyone. She moved with intention. She filled her world with things that made her feel alive. She read books that spoke to her soul, listened to music that made her dance, and surrounded herself with light. She realized that love was not just a feeling, it was a practice, a daily choice to care for the soul that had carried her through every storm. The more she loved herself, the more she understood what love truly meant. It was not sacrifice.
It was nourishment. It was not losing yourself in someone else. It was finding yourself in every moment of peace. She discovered that when she poured love into her own heart, it overflowed naturally to those around her. But this time, it did not drain her. It strengthened her. She had found the balance between giving and keeping, between holding others and holding herself, and that balance became her power. There came a day when she looked at her reflection and smiled, not because she was finally perfect, but because she no longer needed to be. She saw beauty in her softness, grace in her scars, fire in her eyes. She had become her own home, her own comfort, her own source of love. And that realization felt like freedom. She no longer searched for validation in empty places. She no longer begged to be remembered, because she remembered herself, and that was enough. She learned that self-love is not loud. It does not demand attention. It whispers quietly through every act of care, through every boundary set, through every night she chose peace over chaos. It was the moment she chose to rest instead of overwork. The moment she said, "I deserve better," and meant it. The moment she looked at her past and said, "I forgive you." It was in these simple moments that she became whole again. And as she walked through life now, she carried that love like armor, not to shield her from pain, but to remind her that she could survive it. She had learned that self-love does not make you selfish. It makes you strong. It makes you radiant. It makes you unbreakable. She had spent a lifetime waiting for others to give her what she was always capable of giving herself. And when she finally did, everything changed. She found peace. She found purpose. She found herself. The day she chose to love herself was the day she stopped waiting to be saved. She became her own savior, her own light, her own forever home. And that was the most powerful love of all.